Hi, welcome to this session. And in this session, we're going to look at theoretical fundamentals or theoretical underpinnings for development evaluation processes. So, we want to focus on um, those theoretical ideas that influence how certain evaluations are done to assess the effectiveness um, or efficiency or performance of certain projects or program. So we shall look at there are of course more to this. There are many. There are more evaluation theories that keep coming up, and they have been evolving over time. But in this session, we shall focus on some of the majors, including development evaluation, system thinking, utilization-focused evaluation, real-world evaluation, realist synthesis, and participatory, or also known as collaborative models or theories. So we shall look at these each of these in a few. Let's just begin with the development evaluation model. So in this, under this model, evaluation is not just looked at as an evaluation that would be done just at the end or just at the beginning, but this is a kind of evaluation that is responsive to context, that is done to assess whatever is happening around the project or program that is being implemented, and so that the feedback can be gotten to facilitate some kind of key changes that would be innovative enough to uh, to uh, to determine some kind of development processes within that particular project. So if you took an example that maybe there is a project that is going on, maybe for instance it's on social protections, let's say cash transfers that are being given to women for economic empowerment. Could be that while they are implementing, some few problems or challenges are happening, or it could be that while as these women, maybe the objective was that to improve their economic empowerment through cash transfers, then new ideas could come up through the evaluation process. And those ideas could be that maybe these women want to start up other projects or to generate income, or they want to do other kind of social projects to address other social changes, challenges, I mean. So development evaluation therefore initiates some kind of responsive assessment that looks at how particular feedback from evaluation can be used to make innovative changes that would influence further development. So that is what developmental evaluation is about. While these other evaluation concentrate on just doing evaluation for mere purpose of learning, to just generate evidence, in a developmental evaluation, you just the evaluator is generating information. That information can be then used to make some innovative changes. So that's why it's developmental or innovative in this case. So as pattern 2008 of course establishes that of course the whole purpose of this development evaluation is to develop or to innovate or to make positive changes, of course compared to what had already been prepared before the implementation of the project. Because before the implementation of the project, definitely you had an evaluator or the program manager had forecasted, had a forecast that certain that these are the outcomes they would want to achieve. But then in the middle, they, based on the context within which the project is being implemented, there are some new changes that would actually help to make better changes that would be developmental. So it includes asking evaluative questions that would gather information to support some kind of decision making, which is developmental. And in this case, this is why it is not just done by evaluators who are sometimes consultants or hired from outside the organization, but it's involves some kind of engagement or partnership between evaluators and those who are in the innovative or development processes or implementing the project itself. So in this case, the evaluator's primary function is in the team is to elucidate team discussions with evaluative questions, data, logic to facilitate some kind of data-based analysis, and then decisions are made to make developmental suggestions out of this data that has been generated. So again, pattern 2006 gives some dichotomy between the usual evaluation models and then the complex based or developmental evaluation. So by complex based, we mean that complexity based evaluation, we mean those evaluations that happen in situations that are not very clear because of different factors that influence certain implementations of the project. So the dichotomy is that the traditional evaluations render the definitive judgments of success or failure. So in other words, there is pre-planned judgment that, of course, if this is done, then the project would fail. If this is not done, then the project might succeed. But for complexity based or developmental evaluation, the evaluation provides feedback, generate learning, and support direction of how to make certain innovative changes to improve effectiveness. And the traditional evaluation models also position the evaluator outside to assure independence and objectivity. That is what is always happen. That's what always happens. You find organizations or project managers hiring auditors or independent evaluation officers to make sure that the evaluation is independent, impartial, and transparent enough. But for developmental evaluation, the evaluator is part of the team, and in that particular team, the information is generated, and then you have some kind of evidence-based assessment, and then that evidence can be used to make positive judgments for further innovative development processes. And then of course, for tradition, you have the measure of success is against predetermined goals, which I already talked about, while for developmental, the development of new measures and monitoring mechanisms set goals that would emerge and therefore can be used to make those innovative decisions. And under tradition, yes, you also have evaluation that are designed based on linear causal chain. For instance, logical framework, for those who know the logical framework, or the results chain or results based management. But this is different from the developmental evaluation because the predetermination of the cause effect logic is always not straightforward because of the complexity of the situations, because the situation would rather then generate new kind of outcomes, whether intended or unintended, that would influence whether the project would be successful or not successful. So like I said, for instance, earlier in the example of cash transfers, could be that, okay, they had anticipated that maybe giving cash transfers would lead to women to participate in receiving these cash transfers, and then they can use these cash transfers to to start up their own businesses, and then these own businesses can be used to improve income of these women, and then women can then be economically empowered. That is a causal effect logic model, predetermined if cash transfer project is going to happen in a traditional evaluation model. But in a complex based or developmental evaluation, you have some kind of evaluation that is designed to capture the different dynamics or dimensions or interrelated factors that would influence imagined kind of scenarios, of which these scenarios would influence the project not to be effective or to be effective, but based in other words, so therefore producing intended or unintended outcomes. So in this case, the evaluation is therefore designed to be flexible enough to make sure that, okay, if this happens, then we could also improve on the delivery of this project like this. So for instance, in relation to the example I just gave, for instance, in this case, if the project is about giving, I mean, cash transfers for women to improve their incomes for economic empowerment, then throughout the project, new assessments are done in a way that these assessments the information can be used to make other innovative decisions. So in this case, let's say maybe, yeah, after giving women money, then some domestic violence is noticed because men are now fighting for the money that is given to women, and therefore now decision makers must work with the evaluators must work with women now to create some new changes that would be innovative enough to achieve to successfully achieve the goals of giving cash to these women, but also eliminating the challenges that are coming up. So this is the dichotomy that I'm talking about. Then under tradition, you have, of course, it aims at producing generalizable findings across time and space, so time and geography and so on. But for developmental models, they aim at producing context-specific understanding, because you need the context-specific understanding to be able to make better decisions that are innovative enough to create further positive changes. For traditional evaluation, then you have accountability, which focuses on and directed to external authorities such as aid funders or government, or think about all the stakeholders that would require accountability from the evaluators. And this is different from developmental models, where accountability is centered on the innovator's deep sense of fundamental values. So in this case, if women, for instance, were given money, but the predetermined project was to maybe these women to start up businesses, maybe poultry farming or so, then women in this case, after, they would say maybe no, poultry is not good for us because we don't have where to set up these poultry farms and so on. So in other words, in that case, then the innovator, who are, for instance, the women in this case, are giving some feedback that would be used to make further and better innovative ideas. And the evaluator, of course, controls the evaluation and determines the design and the tradition. But for developmental evaluation, the evaluator collaborates. So therefore, the evaluator is working with a team to design and so that the designs can match with the innovative ideas of other participants. Okay. So when is development evaluation appropriate? Yes, in situations that are complex. Yeah, so we have situations that are simple, complicated, and complex. We are going to look at this in the next module, but maybe just to give it a simple way, take an example, for instance, a comparison between a case of let's say raising a child. and then compared to baking a cake. So baking a cake is simple because you can have the person who already who already baked a cake can make a write up of how that particular cake can be produced, and therefore you even have the same recipe of how to make that cake, and it would turn out to be the same if you use the same amount of fire, if you use the same amount of ingredients, you can turn out to have the same cake, same taste and same. But if that now that is a simple situation, but a complex situation can relate to, for instance, let's say raising a child. There is no prescribed method or approach of raising a child. Different children would turn up different based on where they have been raised or who is raising them. Okay, so that is complex. It is complex because there is no simple route of achieving whatever you want to achieve. You could use an approach that so and so used to raise a child, but your child turns out to be a thief or not to be interested in education, while the other one was interested in education and so on. Because there are other environments, the environments from within which you are nurturing this child is completely different from what the other person from where the other person was nurturing the other child, although you are using the some kind of same methodology. So in other words, what I'm saying that some projects could work in northern Uganda while others would not work in while the same may not work well in South Uganda or Central Uganda, because they are different environments, even if the designs are the same. So that's what we mean by situations that are complex. So developmental evaluation can be used in such situations. Then you have, of course, the when in situations that are emergent and volatile, so continuously changing environments. Maybe, for instance, it's an environment that is usually affected by environmental challenges such as pollution or floods or landslides also. So in that case, if a project was in that particular area, then a refocus on what the project should be implementing would then happen. Then you have developmental evaluation can also be yeah, sorry about that. So developmental evaluation can also be applicable where variables are interdependent and non-linear. So I just talked about that, for instance, whereby in the traditional evaluations we always have predetermined plans on what outcomes we want, but then when it comes to actual implementation, then you find that there are many factors that are influencing how your outcomes would be experienced. So developmental evaluation can be used in that case, or in situations that require collaboration among stakeholders from different organizations, because different organizations would then have different goals or objectives, but then you're working in the same project or program, then you may require some kind of innovation for how to work together. If you take an example, for instance, let's say there is an agricultural project, but even within an agricultural project, then you need to educate farmers, but farmers also require money. So in that case, you need to work with banks, for instance, to give collateral, to provide loans. So those are different stakeholders, but they are working in the same project, and they want this project to succeed. So different workings that collaboration could necessitate that you use a developmental evaluation approach, so that you can provide some kind of feedback through evaluation to help these stakeholders take better decisions. Then it can also be done if situations that require real-time learning and development. Okay. So competencies that are needed for an effective development evaluation require minimum, of course there are others, strategic thinking. You need to recognize patterns of changes within the implementation of your project. You need to build relationships because you are working with different stakeholders that are working within the project, or even relationship building between the evaluators and the other stakeholders, because you need to get real data that you can use to analyze and then make evidence-based decisions that are innovative enough. Then you also need to have innovative leadership, whereby the leadership or organizational leadership should be open enough, not closed, to positive deviance. So by positive deviance in this case is that okay, we have organizations that have set policies or procedures on how things should be done, and they always say, okay, no, this is how we have always done it, this is how it is supposed to be done. But then you have these for instance newcomers in the organization who come with ideas, but because the organizational leadership is not open to new ideas, then the way of working out things is the same. The way of implementing certain projects is the same, or programs is the same. So in this case, for developmental evaluation to happen, or you need an open kind of organizational leadership that allows new ideas to come up, and that's what we call positive deviance that we are talking about. Okay. Other capacities could include, of course, community connectedness, and of course, so there's some kind of experts that should be able to use some kind of bottom-up approaches to whereby they work well with communities. Curiosity and observation, appreciative inquiry, whereby the evaluators would now, for instance, engage with these communities, asking them how things have been done, then what would they think that would be done better, and then the evaluators get to appreciate what has been happening, and then new ideas can come up for better changes. Then facilitation skills, communication skills, time management, flexibility and resourcefulness, and etc and etc. Okay. So you could find these resources and read through. You could even go visit YouTube and watch this short video, which I think I'm going to embed it in your Moodle page, and then you can watch it and gain more insights on developmental evaluation. So in this case, we are not going to look at the deeper understanding of these models or theories, but we are going to give an overview of how these models work. Okay, so that is one, that is developmental evaluation. Let's now refocus and look at utilization-focused evaluation model. And under this evaluation, the key focus is intended users for intended uses for the intended users. So the key question here is, what are the information needs of stakeholders and how will they use the findings? So in other words, the evaluation is not just done for purposes of evaluation, for purposes of just learning, for accountability. The evaluation is done based on the idea on who is going to use the evaluation, why are they going to use evaluation, how are they going to, who is going to use the evaluation findings, how are they going to use the evaluation evidence, and why do they need this evaluation evidence, and where and when are they going to utilize these particular findings. So the evaluation is, in other words, done using, based on that particular goal. The goal is about who will use the evaluation and for what purpose. So in this case, the principle is that an evaluation should be judged on its usefulness and to its intended users. And it is, of course, was developed by Michael Patton, and evaluation, who states that evaluation should be planned and conducted in ways that increase likelihood that the evidence out of this evaluation should be able to be used, and therefore, in other words, before the evaluation even is done, then you need the stakeholders need to be known, such that their information needs can be known, so that when evaluation is being done, certain specific data is being generated for specific stakeholders. So that's why it's known as utilization-focused evaluation. Who is going to use the evaluation? Why are they going to use it? And when are they going to use it? And for what purpose? So the evaluation is done to generate findings to inform decisions and improve performance of certain projects. But of course, those decisions, we all know, that are taken by different certain stakeholders. Okay, so it is based on the principle that an evaluation should be judged by its utility. Again, no matter how elegant it is, if at the end this evidence or the evaluation findings are not used, then it is useless. Okay, so the framework therefore is used to enhance the likelihood that the evaluation evidence will be used by different stakeholders, to make some to have some kind of learning and to use it for particular purposes. So two main elements: clear clarification, clear identification, and personnel engagement of primary intention of the evaluation from the beginning, to ensure their intended uses. But to ensure the intended uses, then we need to know the intended users. Evaluator should ensure intended uses of the evaluation, but primary users influence and lead decisions and the evaluation process and end users. Okay, so in simple terms, is that the role of the evaluator is to make sure that the evaluation is done and evidence is there. But then the primary users of the evaluation findings should be able to influence how this particular evaluation information is going to be used. So in other words, so we are saying, in other words, that the evaluator's job is not to take decisions independently. Again, there is some kind of collaboration here between the evaluator and the users of the evidence. So the evaluator's job is not to take decisions independently, but should be able to facilitate the decision making among evaluation users. So evidence. So in this case, for instance, if you are hired as an evaluator and you want to use user-focused evaluation, right away from the beginning, you should be able to know who is going to use the information. And then it is your role as an evaluator to facilitate the decision making by, for instance, you present the information or the evidence that you got to the different stakeholders, and then they can be able to take decisions. Take an example. You've been hired, for instance, by let's say Ministry of Agriculture. No, let's say Ministry of let's say Ministry of Health, and you want to evaluate, for instance, how for instance, distribution of mosquito nets aimed at reducing cases of death by, aimed at reducing malaria cases among certain, in a certain community. So that's your project. Now, as an evaluator, you'd be, let's say the project has been implemented, and then you are required to evaluate. So as if you are using utilization focused evaluation, you are doing the evaluation to generate information. Yes, but at the end of the day, you should be knowing who wants to know about how malaria, or distribution of mosquito nets is being done, or who wants to know the information about whether distribution of mosquito nets is key in reducing malaria cases. Examples of stakeholders could be that, for instance, the Ministry of Health requires that information to see whether they are succeeding in addressing the cases of malaria. Maybe the donors want that information to see whether there are resources that they are funding, there are resources that they are injecting in the Ministry of Education to purchase these malaria these mosquito nets is working. Maybe the government, the local government officials want to know whether in their particular districts the cases of malaria are reducing after distribution of mosquito nets. Maybe the academicians or researchers want to know what is happening with these projects, and so on and so forth. So for you, you are there to call upon all these stakeholders to know them before the evaluation, so that when you are carrying out this particular evaluation, you know what kind of information you need to generate for who and for what purpose. Okay, remember, the whole principle is intended users and intended uses. Okay, so it's very important. So there's some kind of course, an active involvement of intended users, which enhances understanding of evaluation purpose, evaluation ownership, and the use of end results. Okay, because so you need them. Without engaging all those other stakeholders, then your evaluation is considered useless, because at the end of the day, you have produced evidence as an evaluator, but it's not being utilized. Okay. So the steps on how evaluation, on how utilization focused evaluation is done. You have a variety of ways, of course, depending on the context and of course the needs of the evaluation. That influences how you're going to engage in that. So originally in 2009, originally Patton gives, for instance, 5 stages or 5 phases or processes, and you can find them in, for instance, in 2009, Patton and Houghton provide a certain example on how utilization focused evaluation can be done. I have provided this within your reading materials, and it's one of the recommended reading materials. You could search for this and read through how the evaluation, user focused evaluation, utilization focused evaluation was done. But the recent evaluations, recent applications of user focused evaluation has also generated a few extended steps up to 12. For instance, if you see an example of Patton in 2013, there is that checklist by also Ramirez and Broadhead. So those, you can find some other examples that have increased on the steps. Others in 2012, for instance, you can read through this other example where you have 17 steps. But we shall not look at all those. So definitely, if you look at the first 5, they are integrated in this, and even So you can, if you read Ramirez and Boardhead, you could find how these steps are applied. So definitely you have step 1 up to step 5, which involve preparation of the user utilization focused evaluation. Then you have step 4 itself, which involves analysis of the situation. Of course, analysis of the situation also influences how influences the readiness of assessment, influences identification of the intended users and identification of the intended users. Then step 6 to 8, it involves designing of the evaluation itself, whereby you already now know who is going to use the evaluation findings, who is using, what are the uses of that of those evaluation findings. You're already enough to prepare a certain evaluation which is context based. Which is based on how evidence would be used depending on the situation that you have analyzed. And then 9 and 10 involve undertaking the actual evaluation, because now you already know who is going to use the evaluation, for what purpose. You already designed the evaluation, and then now you have already actually implemented the evaluation. You have already now assessed the situation on how you can indeed implement the evaluation. So in 9 and 10, you do implement the evaluation, analyze it, and then you can facilitate, for instance, meetings and collaborations and conferences or workshops to disseminate your findings, so that the intended users can then take advantage of your findings to use that particular evaluation. Of course, phase 12, which has to do with meta evaluation, deals with the whole situation of how the evaluation has been done. So meta evaluations are evaluations that are done after evaluations have been done, so that you can assess how you can assess the evaluability. You can assess how these evaluations were done. Were they done effectively, or there are some things that they did not consider that would have rather rendered these evaluation findings to appear different or not? So that's why you have this meta evaluation, because you reflect on how the evaluation has been done. Okay, so the directions of the arrows, for instance, of course, the red arrows show you how the interactions are done between, of course, the sequences, but then the purple directions show the strategic interactions across non-sequential steps. So non-sequential steps meaning that doesn't have to appear when certain step has already happened, or something like that. And then you have, of course, that the facilitation of evaluation, for instance, feeds back to the users and the users as of evaluation. So it is as simple as how as it is, and how Ramirez and Broadhead have put it across. For more details on explanation of each step, you can visit Ramirez and Broadhead. I've provided that you can provided that document you can read through. So when to use utilization focused evaluation, it can be used for formative, so therefore can use it for summative, it can be used for process, can be used for impact evaluation. So in other words, utilization focused evaluation can be used at any phase of your project, and of course can appreciate the use of both qualitative and quantitative methodologies of collecting data. So these are some of the key readings that you can find, and then read through and see more details on how UFE can be implemented. Okay. Next is system thinking, which seeks to assess the connections and interactions or interrelatedness or interdependence of smaller parts within a system or organization that would lead that influence how a bigger picture or how certain outcomes or impact is should be achieved or is achieved. So it involves some kind of zooming in and zooming out on the different small parts on how a certain organization or project works. So evaluation from system thinking perspective assesses the interrelated variables influencing interventions organizations. Take an example of a vehicle. Okay, so a vehicle has different systems. It has cooling system, it has ignition system, it has the lubrication system, it has I mean, think of all those systems that that help the car to move. So you are looking at this whole body of the car, which is moving, but each system within the car plays its part. If the engine is not cool, then your car might stroll and then it doesn't move. If you do not have enough fuel, then your car will not move. Other systems will not work. If you do not have so if your differential or your pistons are if they so everything has its purpose. Okay, so the system thinking looks at that, so it tears apart each of that system and assesses how that particular system influences the achievement of the influences the final impact. And this is in this case, you put out the cooling system, you have the ignition system, you have lubrication system, and all those systems you pull them apart and then you assess them differently to see how they influence movement of the vehicle. So it's the same as for instance another example you could look at, for instance, your own body part. Your own body. You have respiratory system, you have nervous system, you have discrete digestive system, you have excretory system, and so on. So all those parts work together. But then, for instance, for a doctor to understand whether you are okay health-wise, they need to evaluate, to assess or test how the different systems in your body are operating, whether they are stable enough or not. And maybe it could be that one of them is not working well, that is why you are feeling ill, or one of them or all of them are working well, and that is why you have good health. So it's like that. So system thinking, when you're using evaluation from a system thinking perspective, you are looking at this organization, or you are looking at this project or intervention that you are implementing, and then you start looking at different parts. For instance, the inputs, how are different inputs influencing a certain how are the different inputs influencing how the implementers are doing. Let's say, for instance, you are building a house. The efforts, for instance, the efforts that the porters would use depends on how, for instance, effective you remunerate them. You're paying them. Are you paying them on time or not? If you are not paying them on time, others might actually be absent on certain days, and therefore the work would go down. If you are not buying enough cement on time, then the labor is actually challenged, and therefore performance is challenged. So and of course, if the performance is challenged, then your outcome or the structure might not be up if you had intended to have it up in 2 weeks. So the evaluation using system thinking tears apart of puts apart these different systems and sees how each different system influences the other complete achievement of the impact that you want to do so. So of course we can do this while we have our class discussion. For instance, choosing an intervention or institution that you are familiar with, and make a list of factors that could explain the failure or the failure of the institution or intervention. So see how different factors are actually affecting failure or success of that particular intervention. So systems thinking, perspective, and evaluation, of course, looks at inputs, for instance, resources, information, time, expertise, networks. But it does not only look at that, it also looks at how, for instance, inputs that we have just listed, for instance, influence the throughputs or processes, the structure, the procedure, planning, activities done within the intervention. Because, for instance, if the resources could be influenced by how the organization has planned well, how the activities are implemented, but also the resources themselves can influence how the activities would be done. Okay, because without activities without inputs, then they can't be activities, because you will not have what to use for your activities. Okay, but then also to know the resources or other inputs, then you need to know what kind of activities you want to do. So you can see that kind of interrelationship between those two, the different parts. These are the parts we are talking about. Then if you think about, then the other one is the outputs, the products, the services or goods that result from a combination of inputs and activities. So without inputs and activities, then you wouldn't have outputs. So therefore, to have outputs, you must have well-established inputs and well-established activities, and the combination of those can produce certain kind of outputs. But then a combination of outputs, processes, and outcomes would influence what kind of outcomes would be produced. Okay, so for instance, the outcomes the outcomes can also be influenced by, for instance, external environments. For instance, if your project is for a private businesses, then other factors could include the government must come and tax you. So that taxation could influence how certain outcomes would be achieved or not. Or the behaviors of, let's say you have a business, the behaviors of customers or clientele could influence, for instance, how certain outcomes would be achieved. Then the impact, which is equal to the effects of the intervention on other indicators and wider environment, or the extent to which the intervention changes the wider environment. So in this case, we are looking at the attribution effect rather than contribution, because we want to test whether that particular evaluation, that particular intervention is the one that has indeed caused the changes that you would want to be experienced. Okay, so this is what I've just explained. You can have your time and look at it. You have number one, which is the environment within which the project is or intervention is implemented, and then you have the inputs plus activities. Then you would have throughputs, and then of course the inputs would influence what the environment again, and the throughputs, and then you have also the outputs, which can then later lead to the outcomes, and then you have again feedback on how the project should run. So think about the project psychology that you have. So if, for instance, going back to this question of where we were required to choose those different factors that would influence success or failure of the intervention or institution. So after learning about these, do you think there are some other factors that you have missed in that particular thought or discussion that you just had? If yes, why do you think? Maybe you forgot them, maybe you did not practice the zoom in and zoom out. That's what we just talked about at the beginning. Okay, so you have here some supportive videos you can visit them to give you a brief on how system thinking, more discussion on system thinking. Okay. Next is a real world evaluation model. The real world evaluation model focuses on behavior program objectives to ensure acceptable standards of methodological rigor while operating under real world budget, time, data, and political constraints. So what we are saying here is that within every project or every operation of the organization or institutions, while there are particular standards and methods that are designed to ensure that a particular intervention achieves its own objectives. In this case, we're also saying that evaluation should be done to integrate the real situations within which the interventions operate. Because if you just do evaluation without considering the main constraints of particular interventions, then your evaluation would be limited to some evidence. So in this case, the real world evaluation is emphasizing the idea that that the evaluator must ask questions of whether the program, product, or process is achieving its objectives, considering that there are experiences of budget, time, data, and political constraints that influence how certain objectives would be achieved. Okay, so that is the real world evaluation model. So Bamberger looks at it as an integrated approach to ensure acceptable standards of methodological rigor while operating under these real world budget constraints and time and data and political constraints. But so in this case, the argument is that the evaluation must be done considering those real world constraints that in most cases influence whether effectiveness of certain intervention is achieved. So the context, of course, we're talking about the context where evaluators and their clients face budget and time constraints, is that, yeah, we all know that in most of our organizations where we work, for those who work, the main constraint is always budget. Budget for evaluation is never there. In fact, some organizations do not create time and budget for evaluation, specific evaluation. So you'll find that they don't even consider it, and that's why you'll find that even some organizations don't even have a section for evaluation or even auditing. They are just operating as they are, because some even consider that, okay, evaluation just takes money and time for nothing. Okay, so the purpose for real world evaluation is to counter the constraints of budget, time, data, and politics. And of course, there are different scenarios that the evaluators always face. So Bamberger gives those two scenarios. That's in scenario one, for instance, you have where the project starts, but the choice of evaluation design is constrained by budget, time, technical, and administrative difficulties, and therefore there is always this kind of should we do evaluation or we shouldn't do it, but maybe, the government has not yet did not allocate in the previous budget. The government did not allocate money for evaluation. Therefore, we might have some challenges drawing that. So you find management is not even interested. The management is disinterested in such kind of evaluative scenarios. Okay, so the project starts, but the evaluation design is not there. Then you have evaluation. Whereby you have situations where the evaluator is not even there, is not even considered, but they remember the evaluator when the project is already going on, or when it is even about to end. So Real-world evaluation gives some guidance on how evaluators can then approach such projects to be able to do an effective evaluation. Okay, so take an example here. Bamberger 2007. 7 gives you some scenario. For instance, you have the evaluator and the client here. On the right hand side, you have the evaluator. On the left hand, you have the client. Okay, so this is showing some scenario, that one of the scenarios that we just talked about, and how some evaluators and clients would go about them. So you have on the right, the client says, okay, hi, we would like to contract you to conduct an evaluation of the impacts of our creating new opportunities program, and we are seeking new funding from the state and private donors, so we want a really rigorous assessment of the program impacts. Oh, then the evaluator, oh great, we would be delighted to help you, and we are familiar with all the best evaluation designs for impact assessment. Okay, the client replies, fantastic. I should explain that the evaluation is starting a little late. So you recognize this? This is scenario 2, whereby the evaluation so we are looking at now scenario 2, the evaluator not called until the project is ongoing or is about to end. Okay, so this is the scenario that is being explained here. This is what Bamberger is trying to bring up here. So so I should explain that the evaluation is starting a little late. The 3-year program ends in next month, and we are a little tight for money as no budget was approved for evaluation when the program began, but we do need a really rigorous evaluation. Yeah, maybe, because perhaps maybe, and again, based on this box 1, the client is looking for ways to create evidence, generate evidence that would show that this program is creating impact, and therefore they get some funding. Okay, so the evaluator on the right is replying that, oh, I understand. Oh, I understand. We will do our best. Could you explain what type of baseline data was collected when the program began? Okay, the client replies, well, we didn't actually collect any baseline data, of course. How would you expect them to do baseline if, for instance, they had not in mind that they didn't even have a budget for that particular evaluation process? So, baseline was for no purpose. So, okay, so the client replies, well, we didn't actually collect any baseline data, but I'm sure you can fix that. I don't know if some of you have experienced this in your organizations or projects. So the client again continues and says, okay, so can I tell our funders that you will be able to deliver that final report in 2 months from today? And don't forget, we really need a rigorous assessment of how successful the program has been. Did you say we only have 2 months? That's the evaluator asking. And not much money, and no baseline data. So you see, there are all different constraints explained in this scenario. No baseline data, because baseline data is needed, is done at the beginning so that it can set the standard with from which measurements will be done later to evaluate whether the program has created changes. But there's no baseline data. So of course, now the evaluator wouldn't know, okay, where to begin from. There is no enough money. Time is of constraint because the report is needed just in two months. So all these are different constraints. So Bamberger is trying to depict that real life scenario that evaluator experiences. So if, for instance, you have experienced this, perhaps you might want to adopt this approach for your own project. in the near future, or those that you are in. So the two scenarios, of course, again in details here. So you have the scenario one where the evaluation is commissioned at the start of the project, but budget, time, technical and budget, for budget reasons, yeah, things might not go. The organization in this case knows that the evaluation must be done. Okay, but there is no money, there is no time, there is no technical team to do the evaluation, but also for some purposes or political reasons, maybe some government officials or minister does not want this, does not want a rigorous evaluation for this project, especially for instance in our own countries where we have corruption and so on. So it is difficult in this scenario. It is difficult to spend the time required on consultations and evaluation planning. It is difficult to collect data on comparison group because there is no budget for that. It is difficult. The client is unwilling to authorize correction of the unnecessary baseline data of the project because they do not want to spend more money on that. And there are political influences on who can can be interviewed or what data can be collected. And in this case, for instance, you'll hear, yeah, the evaluation is commissioned in your evaluation office, but then they tell you, your permanent secretary who in the government or the project manager would say, okay, we only need this type of data. We don't need much. So therefore, there is no that rigorous evaluation that would be done. So this is a real life scenario. Real life scenario 2 is where you have the evaluation which is not commissioned until the project has begun and has been operating for some time and is nearing to be completed. Our example here, okay? So this is what we're talking about, for instance. And then so in this case, there is no baseline data that was collected. Secondary data is lacking because there was no money to do monitoring, blah blah blah, and so on. There are time pressure. For instance, you've seen in our previous example that Bamberger gives. Yeah, they want the report in 2 months, but then there is no baseline data. So what does the evaluator do? There are budget constraints. The money is not enough. Besides, they will tell you they are also looking for funding. And there are political constraints on the evaluation methodology and pressures to ensure objective but positive findings. So all these are real life scenarios. So Bamberger says that, okay, wait, we all face these challenges in our projects or in our organizations. Budget, budget is not committed, or the release of fund is late, or the funder or the administrators of the organization cut the budget. Therefore, you can't do well your evaluation. Then you have time constraint whereby there is too much to do in too little time. There is when to start, when this evaluation needed to start, and when does it need to be to be finished. So you have those constraints of deadlines. Then you have time reductions, rescheduling. Do this because there is now the funder has just said, okay, you should produce this particular data for now, and we have it as tentative report. And then as an evaluator, you are facing such challenges. Then we have impact evaluation versus time to have those measurable results, even in times where we don't have baseline data. Data issues, you have baseline data which is unavailable. You have administrative data which is not available. You have unavailability of all unnecessary inaccessibility of secondary data, which is not there. Maybe this organization has not been keeping records. Then you have qualitative data of results or impact, which is sometimes not available. You only have statistics. But to be able to do a rigorous evaluation, you also need some kind of qualitative data to support your quantitative data. You have politics and institutions. Yeah, in the coming modules, we shall also focus on some of of politics of evaluation, which have to do with, for instance, power, and so on. Who commissions evaluation, who influences what kind of evaluation is done, and so on. So you have pressure and demand, you have from stakeholders, you have different interests between different clients. The Ministry of Education is saying we need the data, the Ministry of Finance says we don't have money, we therefore do only this part. The Ministry of Gender says no, we want data for both men and for boys and girls, but then you have enough, you don't have enough money. Then there is evaluation cultures of agencies, different organizations. For instance, as I said, under for instance, developmental evaluation talked about the issue of organizations that are closed, that not allow, for instance, positive deviance, whereby the organization states that okay, for us we do our monitoring and evaluation in this way, we cannot change our standards of monitoring and evaluation. That is politics. Okay, and yet for you as an evaluator, you have experience that for certain particular, I mean, for certain interventions, you must do your evaluation in this way and or the other way. And then, of course, you have who will own the evaluation at the end. Is it the client? Is it the stakeholders? And also among the stakeholders, is it the donors? Is it the community members? Who owns the evaluation? Now, these are real life challenges within the real world that are happening within interventions and organizations. And Bamberger is saying that we must do evaluation that appeals to these real world situations. So the evaluators now, after facing these challenges, must now pose some questions to themselves. What do really clients need? Do they need rigorous evaluation, or they just want simplified kind of evaluation? What is the underlying logic of the program? For instance, if baseline was not done, and then what was the intent? Then how do we then attribute changes to particular impact? How do you attribute certain challenges or certain impacts to the organization? Are certain changes happening because of certain factors within the organization, or it is other contributing factors, not just even the intervention itself? What methods should we apply then? Should we apply mixed methods, or quantitative or qualitative, or quantitative alone? For instance, if the organization has been able to keep on the quantitative, or if the quantitative is not there, do we only now rely on asking participants what they have experienced with the intervention? And then, of course, there is also who are the users, and what are the users of evaluation? For instance, if the evaluation is being done at the end, there's no baseline, if we don't have anything to compare to, then of what use would be the actual findings if they are actually even well informed? And then the validity and of credibility of those evaluation findings if they are faced with those challenges. So these are some of the questions that would pop up if one is applying the real world evaluation. So you have, for instance, so Bamberger and others give you this kind of arrangement on how certain certain applications of real world evaluation can be done. So you have context analysis, which is economic, which has to do with budget; political, which has to do with political constraints; you have organizational and institutional context; and then you have social cultural characteristics. But then under each of these, all these influence the program design, inputs, implementation, outputs, outcomes, impact, and whether the results of a certain project would be sustainable or not. And then, of course, so the actual analysis would be then how therefore can how the project is, how how is the project actually implemented. Data collected from records, key information and observation, participant, non-participant observation, and other kinds of evaluation that would be applied on input, throughputs, and outputs. So there are different steps that are suggested for how real-world evaluation can be done. So step 1 is planning and scoping the evaluation. Step 2 is addressing the budget constraints. So you secure money to do a rigorous and effective evaluation, address issues of time constraints. Perhaps maybe there can be extensions, or you could start evaluation earlier rather than later on. Then addressing data constraints, maybe on issues of how to keep particular data from baseline so that it can be used at a later stage. Addressing issues of political constraints, and then you assess and address the strengths and weaknesses of evaluation design, and then you can help clients also to use the evaluation. Okay, so so they give you so Bamberg and others give you these different steps and how you can what you can do under the different steps. For instance, under planning and scoping, you can define client information needs, define the program theory model, and identify time and other constraints based on real-world evaluation, and then you select the design that would be best fit those particular constraints. And then step 2, you can address the budget constraints. You can address all the four categories of constraints. So for instance, for budget constraints, you can modify the evaluation design to fit the budget that you have been presented with. You can also rationalize some of the data needs so that you pick, for instance, those that are key to influence certain important decision making. And others. Then, for instance, for addressing data constraint, you can reconstruct baseline data. For instance, you can use also, for instance, data on monitoring and monitoring itself, because maybe some records were being kept from monitoring, and then you can, based on that, to create some kind of trend on how things have been changing, and of course and others. So this can give you what you can do under each step to address those particular evaluation constraints. So this you can visit these resources, and then you can find more of what can be done for these particular evaluation processes. Okay. Next is realist evaluation model. The key focus here is we want to the evaluator here wants to assess specific context for evaluation, for interventions, to identify the underlying generative mechanisms that explain how the outcomes were caused and the influencing factors or context. So the key important question when evaluation is going to be done is the evaluator is asking, or the evaluator and the commissioners or the clients are asking themselves, what works, for whom, in what respects, to what extent, in what context, and how. So it's a combination of many questions, but this is the key question of applying a realist evaluation. So the realist evaluation, when we are implementing projects or interventions or policies or programs, they always operate within particular contexts, and those contexts have interrelated factors within the project implementation itself, but also outside the project itself. And those factors operate within that particular context, at individual level, it could be at organization level, it could be at project level, and other levels, as you may know, or community level also. Okay, all those are contexts. These contexts would influence how certain outcomes that you have anticipated as a project manager, how those outcomes or impacts would be achieved, or whether these outcomes would be achieved or not, or whether these outcomes would be negative or positive. In other words, intended and unintended outcomes. Okay, and in what circumstances and how. Take an example. I'll refer back to the other example I gave at the beginning during the developmental evaluation explanation. Providing social protection services, cash transfers to women. Okay, an example. You've given cash to women and you want to empower them economically. But as you have given these women money, they have invested in projects. But at the end of the day, when they brought money at home, the husbands, claimed the money, because traditionally or culturally within the household, the husband is the breadwinner. And in that case, if the woman is not well empowered enough, then they would not benefit from the money that your project intended them to benefit from. Okay, now those are circumstances that I'm talking about. While you are planning to empower these women, in some circumstances, these women are living under a patriarchal kind of culture within the household. And that particular household, now the result could be, okay, the man has claimed the money. After this money has been claimed, the woman does not surrender the money. If they do not want to surrender the money, there's now domestic violence. Now, domestic violence or gender-based violence is as a result of your project, and yet it was not intended. Okay, that is an intended outcome. Unintended outcome. Okay, negative outcome. But you have also achieved one of your outcomes, that the women have received the money and they are economically empowered. Another scenario could be that, okay, you have decided to provide maybe, let's say, items to help women who are going for labor to prepare and go to deliver from health centers. So they have that package. Some organizations call it mama kit. Okay, the mama kit has baby soul, it has stockings for babies, it has laces, and it has powder and so on. The mama kit. Now you decide to give the mama kit to women who are coming out, who are from poor households, or women who are more vulnerable, because you think the household, these women might not afford to go might not afford the items in the mama kit, and therefore might opt for delivering at the traditional birth attendant. So this is working as an incentive that when they have the mama kit, they would be willing to go for skilled birth attendant delivery. Now, you could achieve that they would go, but then another outcome could be that now that men know that these mothers are receiving some packages, therefore they no longer need even the little help that we have been giving them. That is an outcome that you did not intend. Now, so I think those are enough examples. So what I'm trying to say is that realist evaluation in methodology or approach intends to, realist evaluation approach wants to examine those particular circumstances under which certain outcomes are achieved, and what kind of factors influence achievement of certain outcomes, whether intended or unintended. It is as simple as that. So of course it is based on the ontological perspective of realism. So it's an ontology on real world, and shaped by the ontology on real world is shaped by our cognitive processes, experiences, and cultures. That whatever we do, whatever we experience, is achieved by the environment within which we live, how we think, and our experiences that we've had so far. So the inputs, a combination of inputs and activities influence the changes in our reasoning, or the stakeholders' reasoning, and therefore influences how interventions can be changed or implemented to achieve certain outcomes. Think about the other example I gave you about some wanting to put up a house, and then you have these porters, but then if they are paid on time, they deliver. Or if the manager is incompetent, then delivery is not good. So all those scenarios, that's what I'm talking about, that with the combination of resources and activities influences certain reasoning of the implementers of the project, and therefore that would influence whether certain outcomes would be achieved or not achieved. So the realist evaluation is a form of theory-driven evaluation, in other words. So you have what we always call the initial program theory, for instance, that has been designed from the beginning, and then you want to test whether this theory has been able to work. If it has not worked, then you refine the theory to create a new theory that can be used to apply in those similar specific contexts that are the same as this. So again, I repeat, when some interventions might work in the south of your country, while others might not work in the north of your country, or others might work well with the urban within urban centers or urban slums, and if you take those particular projects to rural settings, they will not work, because again, circumstances change. The way people think is different for those who live in urban and those who live in villages. Okay, so, and this is what I'm talking about, the social, economic, political systems influence the complexities and wickedness of the interventions. That interventions become wicked and complex because there are those interrelated factors that influence how these particular projects would happen. Okay, so there is appropriate evidence-based approaches that are needed to review the theories that have been put across, and therefore to be able to generate information that is specific to certain circumstances and certain projects. So this is the nature and characteristic of social interventions. That most interventions, of course, all of them mostly, that interventions are theories because they are based on theories. They involve actions of people, because each intervention has a combination of stakeholders, based on chains of steps, combination of activities and inputs. Iterative, that while there are some steps, some is back and forth. For instance, decision making is back and forth while you're making different changes. Embedded within the social system, which has different factors such as, for instance, culture and how people behave. Then prone to modification because of those other changing circumstances, and then open to systems that change throughout learning. So this is how different, this is the nature and characteristic of social intervention, of course, according to Paulson and others. So an example, for instance, that shows the complexity and wickedness of projects. Think about sexual reproductive health as an example. And let's say, talk about, for instance, controlling pregnancies. You want to, for instance, maybe contraceptive youth, okay? Or you are telling people, okay, please control how many children you're producing, okay? There are multiple contexts here that would influence whether people would take up control, whether the project on controlling pregnancies would work, okay? And those different factors may include, for instance, what are the attitudes, perceptions, and practices among those individuals? What are their cultures? How many are there? How accessible and are the contraceptives? What is the knowledge about the contraceptives? uh, who are the service providers of these contraceptives? So all these are different interlinked factors that would influence whether people would take up contraceptives or not. Okay, context-based mechanism variations occur and non-linear forward or outcomes, or they are unpredictable outcomes that would come up. So there is also again the problem of attribution and replication, which is difficult. That while you have succeeded in the use of in establishing usage of contraceptives in Serere district, does not necessarily mean that if you took this particular contraceptive program in Tanganyika or Goma or Juba or Kivu or Turkana, that it would work. Okay, so it's very different. Where it becomes difficult if you want to replicate that particular intervention in other contexts. Okay, so for instance, you can say, okay, please control your pregnancies, don't produce men. Okay, if they do when they are still teenagers, you say it is too early. When they wait until they are in 40s, you say it is late. When they are produced many, you say no, so when they are producing without giving enough space, it is too gross. So those are the complexities and wickedness that involve certain interventions. Okay, and these require that evaluation should appeal to that particular intervention while operating in certain scenario or context to be able to evaluate how does it work, what makes it work, what makes it not work, and whom does it work for in that particular scenario. And that is what realist evaluation is testing. Okay, of course, this is just that this is another if this realist evaluation depends on both secondary and primary data, but of course in other studies you can use, if you are using secondary data, then that is referred to as realist synthesis, where you evaluate certain secondary data. But for now we are focusing on realist evaluation. So again, it evaluates evidence on complex social interventions, and it involves configuration of context, mechanisms, and outcomes. So in other words, the configuration is that the whole idea is that when you get context plus certain mechanism, you get a certain outcome, and the outcome can be negative or positive according to what is happening. Okay. So context refers to the significant conditions necessary for activation of mechanisms. For instance, ideologies, individual capacities or resources, maybe if the contraceptives, for instance, are for buying, some poor households don't manage those contraceptives and therefore might not use them. Okay, so poverty in this case would be a context. Okay. Then mechanisms, they explain the process of how interventions contribute or do not contribute to realization of these outcomes. Okay, mechanism, for instance, on usage of contraceptives could be education or dissemination of information, because if you disseminate information, there is an idea that if you disseminate information among uneducated people, then they would understand the purpose of contraceptives and therefore they would use them. Okay, so the mechanism, you have educated them or disseminated contraceptive use related information through sensitization. Okay, the outcomes are those that result from a combination of context and mechanisms. Okay, for instance, yes, this household is poor. You want the couple to use contraceptives to control pregnancies or childbirth, and then you have used sensitization or education to change their perceptions and attitudes towards use of contraceptives, and therefore they have started using contraceptives, and therefore the outcome is that they are not getting pregnant. See how it flows? Yeah, so that's how it goes. So this is the illustration that shows what I've just explained. Okay, so you have context that we have context within which the intervention operates, and then within your intervention you have different mechanisms on how you want to implement that intervention, and that would lead to the outcomes. So context plus mechanism equals outcome. Simple. That's the whole idea of using realist evaluation. So you have your mechanisms. So for instance, you have your context. Context 1, you have context 2, you have context 3. And then you apply your mechanisms. Okay, context here could be that, for instance, let's say again on contraceptives, you have context 1 is that the household is poor. At individual level, the individuals don't have enough money. The context is that no, at individual, for instance, the couple is not knowledgeable about contraceptive use. Context 2 could be that the whole household income is not is limited enough that they cannot afford to purchase the house the contraceptives. Context 3 could be that maybe the contraceptive cannot be easily accessed because the health center is far, or it could be context within the intervention itself that maybe the delivery of these contraceptives is not on time, and so on. So but then let's assume, okay, those are the contexts, and now you have decided to sensitize. That is mechanism 1. You have decided to take these contraceptives through outreaches to communities. That is mechanism 2. And you have decided to say that maybe they shouldn't pay for these contraceptives. They are free of service. And now these mechanisms are operating within these 3 contexts that we talked about. The outcomes could be you can achieve the outcome of people of women accessing contraceptives and practicing them in that case, using them. But it could be that while others are using these contraceptives, there are other negative outcomes that are coming up, that maybe now women have decided to use contraceptives hideously, or some couples have just decided to use contraceptives because for them they do not want children, and then it could lead to gender-based violence or divorce also, because maybe the other partner needed more, and then when they find out that the woman or the husband is using contraceptives, then those are problems that are resulting from your intervention. Of course, you have intended and unintended outcomes. Okay, so let's take an example, a real one. Okay, so let's say again, giving cash transfers or incentives or mama kit or whatever to couples to improve maternal health care services. Okay, so you have decided to give incentives. By giving incentives in terms of money or mama kit also, may encourage men, that is context, to be supportive. Being supportive is an outcome. That's improving service uptake or contraceptive uptake. That is outcome 2. Outcome. Okay, it is positive. But these poor couples, which is context 1, may use the given incentives, if you are giving them money, that is mechanism, for other purposes. Maybe they are purchasing other items that they didn't need. For instance, in one case, the mama kits were being given to these poor women, and then the poor women, because they did not have other needs such as food and so on, they decided to sell some of these to make exchange of these items for monetary resources, to use those monetary resources for other to get other needs. So that is an intended outcome, and that is why we are having a negative here. Okay. Uh, Giving additional incentives, which is a mechanism, to these couples, which is context, who go to health facilities together for antenatal care, that is mechanism 2, may encourage partners to change their behaviors, that is outcome. So this is how realist evaluation is done, to assess the effectiveness or outcomes of or impact of a certain intervention. So example 2 could be, okay, provision of free contraceptives. I just talked about that. So let's assume, what if the government decides to use public-private partnership to involve the private sector and non-government organizations for contraceptive campaigns and free distribution? You can decide to do your own realist example here. Okay, so therefore we are saying that in any evaluation, especially for realist evaluation, context matters because it influences reasoning of how the implementers would act, on how the service users would act. Okay, context can influence how donors will act, how government will act, how NGOs would act, how the community members would act, and so on. And in contexts where generative mechanisms cannot work, the likelihood of results are unintended or negative. Okay, so those contexts where whatever you have decided to implement in your objective, if it is not friendly or context based, then you are likely to get unintended outcomes. Okay, so the generative outcome mechanisms can only work if circumstances are right. Okay, it's like baking a cake. Like I said, if you have the right ingredients and you mix them up and you apply them under the right temperatures, you should be able to have a good cake that is a replica of what the other person had already done by providing those ingredients. Okay, but if the generative mechanisms cannot work, if for instance the other person used a cooker and for you are using a charcoal stove or a gasoline stove, then or paraffin, then you might have a different outcome. The cake might not taste just as you intended. Okay, so performing risk evaluation, 4 phases: formulation of initial program theory or middle range theory. The initial program theory always explains how you want your outcomes to be achieved from your intervention, and then after having the initial program theory, then you design the study or methods that would be utilized to test or to collect data regarding what the users and how they are participating, regarding the stakeholders and how the intervention is working for them and when and so on. Okay, remember our question of for who, for whom, when, how, and so on, under what circumstances. Then you analyze the context, mechanisms, and outcome by configuring them. Okay, then you report. You clarify on interlinkages, identifying the key context and intervention elements, and therefore updating the program theory. And in this case, you can have a new theory which is different from what the other intended use. I mean, the initial evaluators had designed, because that was designed before the evaluation has been before the evaluation is done. But now that you have done a realist evaluation and you have known how the intervention works under specific circumstances and for whom, then now you can update the theory to to have a better kind of program theory that would help other interventions or replication of other interventions, but only in those particular circumstances that you have assessed. Advantage is that it gives produces evidence-based policy, evidence for informed policy decisions, and of course produces specific context evidence for informed decision making for policy interventions and so on. So you can visit these resources for more information regarding realist evaluation, and so yeah, some have been provided. You can engage them and you learn more. Finally, we have participatory or collaborative evaluation. And the key focus for this is engagement of stakeholders in evaluation process. All stakeholders. In every intervention, there are different stakeholders that always operate, including beneficiaries, including the implementers, including the evaluators, including the project managers, including the organization managers, including the donors, and so on. So participatory evaluation involves engagement of all these stakeholders, and by stakeholders we mean everyone who is impacted by the project or your intervention, or everyone who might have an impact on implementation of your project. The donors have an influence on how your project will be implemented because they are the funders. The beneficiaries can be impacted by your project because they are the beneficiaries. Now, a combination of whether they are external to your project or internal to your project, as long as they have any connection to your project, implementation of your project, those are stakeholders. And participatory or collaborative evaluation model looks at involvement of all those stakeholders. Okay. Later on in other models we shall be looking at stakeholder analysis and so on. So the key question here is, what are the information and strategic needs of participants? Okay, and this is a picture that depicts that illustrates how different stakeholders can be involved at community level. Okay, so do we need everyone to be involved in M&E? Under this particular participatory model, the answer is yes. Okay, so you could think of any intervention, and then you ask yourself whether you need to involve all other stakeholders or not. Okay, so participatory monitoring and evaluation is a process that involves all stakeholders in the assessment of the project or intervention, and the whole purpose is to collect information that can be used for corrective or for evidence-based corrective action. Okay, so Harvey of course looks at it as a process of learning from experience. Okay, partnership with community leaders. There is this idea of us evaluators or the experts, okay, with that, who come with biased with that idea of, okay, we know it all because we have been doing evaluation in all other programs, we do not need to involve community members. So that is one of the problems with these other conventional evaluation mechanism, approaches. So therefore, the use of PRA is very, very crucial. PRA, I mean participatory rural appraisal. Okay. So this is a picture that depicts, of course, it illustrates the traditional versus participatory approaches. So under conventional, so you have your evaluator here, who has come with his NGO or organizational or government vehicle, comes the community, visits the community, and then sits on his car, and then has all these predetermined questions on what he wants to know about what is happening with the community, and then he asks questions, ticks, and does so, and then goes back to office and analyzes. But that is different from the participatory evaluation. Under participatory evaluation, you have engagement of community members even right away from the beginning, from designing the evaluation, doing the evaluation, and analyzing the evaluation, and even writing reports that are coming out of the evaluation process. So that is the difference between the two. The key issue here is that there is involvement of stakeholders right from the beginning throughout the whole process, including analysis, including production of reports, and so on. Okay. So this is a dichotomy between the two. So we have conventional M&E, and then we have participatory M&E. Who does the conventional? Mostly experts. For participatory, stakeholders, including communities, project staff, and outsider and including, of course, the outsider facilitator, who is the evaluator in this case. And then you have it's the predetermined indicators to measure inputs and outputs. But under participatory, all indicators are identified and measured by the stakeholders, including the beneficiaries of the project. How it is done, you can use usually the experts who under conventional, they use those economic models, classical ways of evaluation, questionnaires by outsiders, usually neutral evaluators, as they call them, independent evaluators, who are distant from the project, so they don't know how the project has been operating. They are here to do an evaluation and produce evidence. But under participatory evaluation, so you have simple mixed methods, and it is done by the stakeholders themselves. And then you have it is done. Why is it done? To make project and staff accountable for funding. But then for participatory M&E, there is some kind of empowering stakeholders. Okay, so for instance, we have had projects where, so you have, for instance, the government wants to construct boreholes and make sure that there is access to safe water by this community, and then also easy access could be reducing on the distance, but also on the quality of water. But then under convention, maybe the evaluation comes they just come and count how many boreholes have been constructed and whether they are operating. But then under participatory, the participatory evaluation helps to even go just further, not just about counting the boreholes or whether the number of people who are using it, but it goes beyond asking who maintains it, how is it maintained, can the people maintain it themselves, or are they satisfied with the service? So all those particular issues. So Harvey also gives, of course, how the stretch of how evaluation can involve a participatory framework. So you have project identification, that there must be full participation, of course, from end to end during problem identification, problem analysis, planning, selecting evaluation processes, and so on. Okay, so participation is not just that while you are an evaluator, you design your own evaluation plan, and then you come with it, and then you decide to involve stakeholders at the end. That is conventional, because you have already predetermined what you want to know. But under participatory, it is all right from the beginning of the problem identification, and you work with community members, and you implement together, and you even evaluate together what has been achieved. Some tools to use during participatory evaluation could use ranking, prevalence, focus group discussions, structured interviews, season one historical diagramming, key informant interviews, and so on. So think about all those different mechanisms or methods that you can use to get to involve stakeholders to generate evidence that would give you enough data for decision making. So you can visit, for instance, Chambers 1995 or 1994 to look at in more details on these different evaluation tools. Okay. So of course, one would ask, okay, then, okay, how then do I, how do I then make sure that the participation is very key and it's significant enough to produce, to influence effective participation. So there are different types and different levels of participation. They carry with them implicit normative assumptions of good and bad, while others have produced focus have been produced focusing on intentionality or associated approach of those who initiate their participation. You can read that from Cornwell 2008, and then others have defined, of course, participation typology from citizens. Okay, for instance, recipients of development intervention perspective. Others, such as Pretty, gives typologies from perspective of motivations of those who initiate and engage in the practice, while others define from interest point of view. Okay, so you have Einstein's 1960 gives the ladder of citizens' participation, whereby some participations citizens participate while they are manipulated. Others participate by giving just information. Others just participate by getting some incentives for their participation. Others participate because they are involved in the project. So in other words, from number 1 towards number 8, number 8 would be the best participation. So it depends on how you want to implement your evaluation, but of course different levels would also mean the level of the information that you can use to involve all stakeholders to participate in decision making afterwards. Then there's this typology by Pretty, whereby again also she gives around 7 types of participation. Again, almost similar as Einstein's. So Pretty 1995, that you have manipulative participation, where people just participate by being present. Passive participation, where people participate by being told what has already been decided. Participation by consultation, they just come to answer questions. And that is mostly what our evaluation is, our most of evaluators do nowadays within conventional kind of evaluation. But then towards number 7, you have self-mobilization, where people participate and take development initiatives without outsiders, and they do it on themselves. Okay, so there's that kind of community ownership, and community members do it themselves to understand what they are doing. And that, of course, has an advantage that it empowers community members. They have this sense of ownership, and it itself can even influence sustainability of a certain intervention, because community members already know the purpose of why they started it and why it is going on. Take an example of these small money saving groups within local communities, that, for instance, community members come up with their own initiative. They start organizing themselves, and they come up with these small groups to save money that at the end of the month so and so takes, and after they also contribute, and then they start their businesses, and that is a self-mobilized project. and sometimes it can be more effective. And when it comes to evaluation, then they do their own evaluation, they design it, and they know how to work with the externals. Of course, the external, we are not saying that the external shouldn't be there, but they are just there to facilitate, not to predetermine what these community members should do. Okay, so it's some kind of collaborative working together or collective kind of evaluation with community members. And of course, in the recent terminologies, it has now been it's looked at, for instance, at this level it's looked at community-based monitoring, or some call it community-led monitoring. Others call it citizen science. Okay. Typologies based on interest, of course, based on representation, instrument, and so on. For instance, what participation means to the implementing agency, what participation means for those who are receiving the benefits, and what is participation for. Okay. Normative, for instance, so you have legitimacy versus inclusion, efficiency versus cost, sustainability versus privilege, and then you have empowerment versus empowerment. But of course, both as a means and an end in continuing some kind of dynamic. So that is transformative. Okay, so the form of participation, you have normative, which is just for display purposes, and then you have instrumental, which as a means of achieving cost-effective or local facilities. And then you have representation, whereby people can be given a voice in determining their own development. And then you have transformative, which has in itself some empowerment processes that would lead to the fact that community members or beneficiaries would benefit while also doing their own evaluation for purposes of continuity. And remember, when we defined development as a means and an end in itself, that's what we talked about. So, as for instance, as these women in communities engage in mobilizing resources to start up their own projects, that would lead to economic empowerment. But in its own itself also is an end, because in that process these women are also empowered. Okay. So who is involved in the participation? All of them, as you can see them here. Okay, as depending on the intervention, of course. Technical departments, project managers, community members, different other stakeholders, community-based based of organization or stakeholders from non-governmental organization. You have private sector, you have government authorities, development planners, partners such as donors, and so on and so forth. So participatory M&E involves all of these individuals. The principles, of course, include equal participation. So there's nothing like this is an external evaluator, this is a community member, so there should be some kind of power leverage also. No. It should be inclusive, there should be some equality between the stakeholders, there is transparency between all stakeholders. But of course, when it comes, for instance, to government programs, or depending on other or traditional, where you have leaders who want to use that kind of using the upper hand, then transparency is sometimes contested, and then you have but of course there should be sharing of power. That while this project is going on, women should also have the same equal right or freedom to speak out, not just to leave the men to act on because they are breadwinners, or they are considered powerful in that community. There should be responsibility sharing, and there should be some level of empowerment. Key characteristics of participatory M&E also, of course, involve drawing on local resources, so some kind of appreciative inquiry, because we need to know as evaluators that these communities also have knowledge on how they have been doing their own things, on how they have been organizing themselves. Okay, so involving them also should bring out the idea that they should be able to have freedom to use their capacities as part of resources for evaluation, and its answers and questions should be based on local perceptions and strategies and priorities, not the priorities of the evaluators. It should recognize the wisdom and knowledge of poor people, and it should ensure stakeholders are part of decision making. So that is, of course, participatory M&E, and that is all about the models and theories of evaluation that we are looking at. And so we are saying that there are a variety of evaluation models, of course, that value stakeholder participation, and for other models you could do some research. So it depends on the choice of what evaluation model you can use, or evaluation theory that should influence your evaluation, depends on the purpose of evaluation. For others, it depends on who is going to use the evaluation and why. Others depend on the innovation criteria. Others depend on assessing the context from which the evaluation are being done. Others depend on who should be involved, whether it's all stakeholders or not. Others depend on looking at doing evaluation, but putting into consideration of constraints of budget, time, politics, and data. So they differ on their recommendations for why and how stakeholders include what stuff or groups should, whether those groups should be um, uh, involved. Okay, so that's all regarding the theoretical underpinnings of evaluation. Okay, so you have an assignment there. You can look at it and take some information and pick one of the evaluation theories or models, and pick an intervention, and describe how you can apply such, and describe how and why you would desire a certain model to influence that particular evaluation. Okay, so these are some of the resources where you can find information on participatory M&E, and they would be able to help you out. Okay, that is the end of our session, and thank you.